Many years ago, when I was still a student, I remember that I had a very bad day, or rather, I had several bad days in a row. And I remembered that it was finally Friday evening and I wanted to get distracted from it all, so I decided to go to the movies. I took the subway during what was then a very cold and rainy winter evening, and I had no idea what I wanted to watch. When I arrived at the movie theater and looked at the many different choices they had, I saw the poster of a Chinese movie called Farewell, My Concubine. So I picked that one, and for about 2.5 hours, I was suddenly immersed in a beautiful story, in what was then to me a highly unfamiliar world. The sound and images that were projected on us, the audience, belonged to an art form called Beijing opera, or Jingju in Chinese. I would love to tell you more about my experience with the Chinese opera, because without any doubt it enriched my understanding of storytelling. I will share with you some pictures, several books of course, and one movie. So my interest in Chinese opera started with this movie, which featured the fantastic actors like Gong Li, Leslie Cheung and Zhang Fengyi. Now, without spoiling the plot of the story, I can say that it is not an easy to digest story. It is a drama, and although it distracted me for an evening, it did not really uplifted my mood back then. The title of the movie, Farewell, My Concubine, refers to a famous Chinese opera play, and it is also the name of a book written by Lillian Li. The book, and the movie of course, tell the story of two male Beijing opera performers who grew up together and become famous. One of them is a male Dan actor, meaning a man who plays a female role. The other man plays a warrior of the ancient Chu kingdom. Throughout the book, we mainly follow the life story of the two performers, but the story has more layers to it. We see how their art, the Beijing opera, evolves as China evolves politically and culturally. We witness their ups and downs and how their personal relationship develops through time, and how the opera play called Farewell, My Concubine has a central role in their lives. There were several things that attracted me to the Chinese opera that I discovered for the first time in this movie. One thing for sure were the unfamiliar sounds that intrigued me. Also, instead of wearing masks, the performers paint their faces according to specific and predefined patterns. When you visit the actors before their performance, and I really recommend trying to do that as part of the experience when you go to a Chinese opera, then you see how they pay meticulous attention to every detail. The shades of coloring, the shape of the eyebrows, and so on. And every color on a face has of course its meaning. A red face, for example, signifies uprightness and loyalty. A blue face represents bravery but also pride, and a white face normally signifies treachery and a cunning person. The images that you see here were taken just before I attended a performance in a beautiful Guangzhou theater in Nanjing. Guangzhou is a Chinese opera style that is even older than the Beijing opera and has influenced the later in several ways. I find it wonderful to watch the process of preparing. You can see here how hair locks were carefully glued to the head of a female artist, and step by step she transforms into the character that she is about to represent on stage. Now, the clothes they wear, the colors on their faces, the attributes they bring with them on stage, and so on, make them easily recognizable to most people in the audience. For example, I saw a man on stage with what looked like a decorated whip or rod in his hand, which indicated that he was traveling on horseback. I only understood this because my Chinese brother-in-law was so kind to point it out to me while we were watching the Kunchu performance. I found it interesting that the audience did not need a prop horse on stage to understand what was going on, because from many details like this, they are able to read what is happening. What I also find different from the beautiful Western operas is the way the audience reacts to certain characters when they appear on stage. They then shout loudly, "How, how," which is the equivalent of our bravo cheers. But they also clap intensively during certain scenes, and it is a quite vivid interaction with the audience. I just love the whole atmosphere that is there. To me, Lillian Lee, the author of the book Farewell to My Concubine, succeeds in a masterful way to tell the story of this friendship between two men, while she also introduces us to the fascinating world of Beijing opera, and while taking us to a turbulent episode of the relatively recent Chinese history. I think that the book and the movie make a good pair. The beautiful and intense story of the book comes even more alive through the music, the dance, and the costumes of the Beijing opera performance that are shown in the movie. Maybe it is because I'm not Chinese that I needed to have these images to better understand the story. Anyway, I was just blown away by it. And look, I even still have the VHS cassette that I bought back then, which says something about my age, I'm afraid. So that Friday evening was the starting point for my love for Beijing opera or Jingju and for other forms of Chinese opera like the Kunju, as mentioned already. Through the years, I was lucky to see several performances with my Chinese wife and our son in Beijing and Nanjing in mainland China. If you're like me and you don't speak Chinese, so we don't understand what the performers are saying or singing, however you like to discover the Chinese opera, then here are a few tips. First, prepare for the unfamiliar. So an open and curious mind to discover this way of storytelling is, I think, important. The second tip is that it is useful to always inform yourself up front about the plot of the play. So our Western brains not only enjoy the feast of sounds and colors, but our brains also get some help in decoding what it all means that we see and hear. A third tip is to ask if they have subtitles in the Chinese theater. Many Chinese opera theaters provide real-time English subtitles on large screens on each side of the stage. And that is also a big help, of course, to understand the story. The fourth tip is to be aware that the Chinese opera is so much more than only the spoken words. It contains an extensive symbolic language that is not only represented in the colors on the faces of the actors, as mentioned earlier, but also in the high-pitched singing and the incredible detailed attention paid to how the characters move on stage, and the many delicate and purposeful gestures of the hands. It is all these direct and indirect ways of communication that tells the full story. So even if you don't speak Chinese, there are all these symbolic clues that help you to understand what is happening. And then, if you like what you see and hear, and you get hungry for more, then there are several books that I like to recommend that can help to get to a next level of understanding. The first book I recommend is this little booklet called Peking Opera, The Performance Behind the Painted Faces. Written by Xu Shengbei, it is a nice introduction to this art form. It is meant for a wider audience, and it definitely helps to pick up much more of the symbolic language when watching a performance. If you want to go even further in your quest to learn more about Beijing opera, I recommend this book called The Soul of Beijing Opera: Creativity and continuity in the changing world by Li Ru. She's a professor at the University of Leeds, and she explains not only the meaning of Beijing opera, but also its history and its evolution. And you get, of course, an overview of the available literature on the topic. In chapter 2, for example, the author talks about a legendary heart and intensive training that aspiring performers need to follow. It is called the 4 skills and the 5 canons. The 4 skills are singing, speaking, dance acting, and combat. The canons cover the mouth, the hands, the eyes, the body, and the steps. It often takes 6 to 8 years of drill and intensive training to master these elements and to become what is called a total performer. They have to master it all if they want to be called Beijing opera performers. When I read this chapter, images from the movie Farewell My Concubine came to mind, where young children living in another time are experiencing the extreme hardship of the training. I like how Li helps the reader to see Beijing opera not only in a historical perspective, but she also goes much deeper into the matter and makes us aware that Beijing opera, and also other Chinese opera styles, is an art form in evolution. Although it is based on many old conventions, the performers who truly achieve mastery have always been able to bring their own creativity and innovations into this art. The principle that enables this is called Chen, or pass down and carry on. This is an interesting and refined concept that I find so typical for the Chinese culture. It signifies the relationship between the past and the present, where the old conventions that define the art form continue to exist, yet there is also space for evolution. Hence the meaning of carry on. I like this idea. It is humble and yet powerful because it makes you aware that you work with an old art form that was given to you to use, but also you receive the possibility or maybe even the duty to ensure its future. And maybe this principle is one of the reasons why Beijing opera continues to exist. Another book that I definitely don't want to leave out approaches the Beijing opera from the perspective of the costumes and what they communicate. The book is called Beijing Opera Costumes, and the subtitle is The Visual Communication of Character and Culture. It is an extensive and impressive research on the traditional Beijing opera roles and their costumes. But unfortunately, the book is quite expensive. That's a pity because this is highly specialized knowledge, and if we want to share and spread this knowledge to a wider audience, then making books so expensive doesn't really help. Anyway, it is a unique book, especially for the English-speaking world, and it is written by Alexandra Bons from the University of Oregon. I found the concept of this book highly original, and for sure not only relevant for people who study theater arts. This book has a much more broader relevance. For example, I find it relevant for my profession as a psychologist. What I mean is that this book, The Soul of Beijing Opera, approaches this art from what we could call an inside-out approach. We learn about what Beijing opera is, about its history, its principles, how it's passed on from one generation to the next, how it evolved, its political relevance, and so on. And it also touches upon what we see and hear on stage. While the book by Alexandra Bons has an outside-in approach. She starts from the visual aspects of the art, because she starts with what we see on stage. And then through her research findings, she enables us to read or decode what we see via the variety of costumes and via the many different conventions on how the faces need to be painted. And by this we learn about the characters and the meaning behind the things we see. So these two books let you discover the Beijing Opera from two different perspectives. You might remember from other Bold Books and Bones episodes that I'm always looking for ways to improve my observation skills as a psychologist. And that is why I'm happy that I found this book by Alexandra Bons, because she provides us with a comprehensive symbolic language that enables also people outside of China to read these age-old stories told on stage. So for me, observing and enjoying the Beijing Opera as a unique way of storytelling with the help of these books helped me to have new ideas on how a story can be told and how powerful symbolic language can be. Now here is a suggestion. If you're looking for a great story, then you might want to read the book called Farewell to My Concubine. If you like the story, then maybe you might want to watch the movie too. So you can also visually absorb the story and of course the art form of Beijing Opera. And as often when stories are told via two different media, it are not 100% identical stories. If then you would like to know more about Beijing Opera, then maybe you want to read one or more of these books on the subject. And then I recommend to revisit the story Farewell, My Concubine by rereading the book or by watching the movie again. Because then you will see that suddenly you will have a much richer understanding of this story. You will most probably, just like me, discover many things you might have overlooked before you read the books about Beijing Opera. But most important of all, and we don't necessarily need books for it, is just to enjoy Beijing Opera. I hope you liked this episode of Bold Books and Bones, and I hope I made you curious about Chinese opera. If you want to support the channel, then please subscribe and share it with someone you know that might be interested. Thank you for visiting Bold Books and Bones. Stay free and healthy, and hope to see you next time. Bye.